Are you ready for class? Welcome back to the Panic Room, everyone, and to another episode of Pax's Little Library of Horrors. So, guys, I recently was lucky enough to go to a library sale, and I found some gems for our little library. At least I think so. And today is the first of those gems. So today we're going to be talking about Imaginary Fred. Now, I know there's a glare because this is one of those super shiny hardback kids books, but look at the little, like, detail on the front here. Yeah, isn't that pretty? So for me, when I read through this book, obviously it touches on, a big childhood trope that some of us might have even participated in, which is the idea of an imaginary friend. However, this book sort of builds on this whole idea, this lore, if you will, of having an imaginary friend, and the way it ends is happy, kind of, sort of, but very strange. So this book is actually short enough to read. So I thought, we could go through it together. Maybe I can show you a picture here and there, and you can draw your own conclusions as to what you think about our imaginary Fred. Headaches are a pain. A bee sting hurts even more. But there's one thing that's worse than getting stung on the head by a bee on a rainy day, and that is loneliness. Being alone is no fun. The first 5 minutes are okay, but it's downhill from there. And if you're alone, you're alone. It's not as if you can wish a friend to life. Usually this is true. You can wish and wish until your hair stands on end, but no imaginary friend will appear. Unless the conditions are just right, and if you add a little electricity, or luck, or even magic, then an imaginary friend might appear just when you need one. An imaginary friend, like Fred. So, here's Fred, our cute little imaginary boy. Fred floated like a feather on the wind until a lonely child wished for him. Fred was always happy to be summoned, and he tried really hard to be the best imaginary friend he could be. He dressed up, he dressed down, he played ball, became a ball. Yes, that's exactly what I mean. He became a ball. He's naked here. We're already kind of getting a little weird. And did whatever else a real friend wanted to do, without once complaining. But no matter how hard Fred tried, the same thing happened every time. One day, his friend would find a real friend in the real world, a friend who did not have to be ignored when the grown-ups were around. And when this day came, as it always did, Fred would feel himself fade. So already kind of like, that's kind of sad and tragic. Usually by lunchtime on the second day, Fred would be mostly invisible, and by bedtime on the fourth day, there would be barely a scrap of Fred left, just enough for the wind to catch and whisk him into the sky, where Fred would stay until someone new wished for him. Look at this. So here, his friend found someone in real life, and now he's just getting blown away by the wind. Just a feel-good children's book. Fred was glad that his friends found other real friends to play with, but sometimes he wished he had a friend who would need him forever. He dreamed of a friend who liked reading, music, and drama like he did. He imagined them sitting together, reading adventure stories and looking for shapes in the clouds. This was Fred's dream. And one day, a lonely boy called Sam wished hard for a friend when the conditions were perfect. Fred appeared and soon realized that Sam was the friend he had been dreaming of. Oh, and just so you know, remember when I said that the conditions had to have electricity? Yeah, there's a pig getting electrocuted. You're welcome. Oh, and if you're wondering, yeah, he died. Yeah, see? Again, you're welcome. Fred never had so much fun. Sam loved to read, just like Fred, and was most upset if he didn't get through at least one book per day. Is he a booktuber? When they weren't reading, Sam and Fred would try to understand how the toilet worked. Yes, I said that. Toilet. They'd listen to music on Sam's dad's sound system, which had 13 speakers. Or they would write plays and act them out for Sam's parents. But even though every morning brought new delights, Fred couldn't help but think that every evening brought them closer to the day that Sam wouldn't need him anymore, and that would be the saddest day of his imaginary life. So Fred decided that he would enjoy every single moment with Sam until that time came. The two friends pretended to be French and studied mimery. They made Japanese masks, practiced their classical instruments, and planned their own comic book. They called themselves the Dramatic Duo. But one day, Sam came home late from a party, and Fred felt a nervous flutter in his imaginary tummy. Was this the beginning of the end? Was he headed back into the sky? Fred checked his arm and thought that maybe he had faded a little already. Was this the beginning of the end? Holy God! When Sam came home, he had an excited look in his eyes. a look that Fred had seen before. I made a new friend, Sam told him. She's a girl called Sammy, which is funny because I'm called Sam. She loves to read and has written and illustrated her own comic book series. You're going to love her, Fred. Fred thought he probably would love Sammy if he were able to stay around long enough to meet her. I know! But don't worry, Sam said. Just because I met Sammy doesn't mean I don't need you. You're still my main man. In Fred's experience, there was only room in the heart for one best friend. I will always be your friend, Fred said. Just promise you won't forget me. I promise, said Sam. And he meant it. The next morning, Sam was gone when Fred woke up and there was a note on his pillow. I'm meeting Sammy to brainstorm our comic book. Back later, your pal Sam. Comic book? Thought Fred. That was our idea. Me and Sam. Fred checked his arm again. Definitely fading this time. When Sam came home several hours later, Fred called an emergency meeting of the dramatic duo. Okay, Sam, he said. I want to prepare you for what's coming. In a day or two, I will disappear. It's not your fault. It's just that now you have a real friend. You don't need me anymore. The best thing you can do is let me go without making a scene. Sam did make a scene. He swore he would never let Fred go, but the next day, Sam left the house early again to meet with Sammy, and Fred was left behind. I can see through my hand now, thought Fred. When Sam returned home later that day, he brought Sammy with him. Sammy wore round glasses that made her eyes seem huge. She pulled a cello case behind her on her cart and carried an art bag so that she could work on her comic book whenever an idea struck. Sam introduced them. Sammy, meet Fred. Fred, meet Sammy. And here is Sammy. Right there. Do you guys see what I'm saying? Like, to me, this is kind of dark. Like, this kid's contemplating his imaginary death. This is a waste of time, thought Fred. Only people with imaginary friends can see an imaginary friend. But Sammy stuck her hand out in exactly the right direction and said, Pleased to meet you, Fred. Fred was surprised. He'd never been visible to two people at the same time before. I know you're worried that I don't need you anymore, said Sam, but you're wrong. I need you now more than ever. Why? Asked Fred. Why do you need me now? You've got Sammy. 2 reasons, said Sam. First, I never want to let you go. Never gonna give you up. Fred thought he would cry, and that was only reason number 1. And reason number 2, he asked? Tell him, said Sammy, elbowing Sam the way friends do. Okay, said Sam. Reason number 2 is that we need you to be in our quartet. Fred was confused. Quartet means 4, he said. There are only 3 of us. Aha, said Sam like a great detective. That's where you're wrong. Yes, said Sammy, clapping her hands. You're wrong because there are 4 of us. Sammy stepped to one side and Fred saw a small girl with a violin case and a smile that made him want to smile too. This is Frida, said Sammy. Hi, Fred, said Frida, waving her hand. Sam's told us all about you. I hope we can be friends. Sammy has an imaginary friend, Fred realized, and he waved back as he noticed his hand seemed absolutely solid, not see-through at all. Frida set her violin case on the floor and opened it. We need to practice or we'll never get to Carnegie Hall, she said. Sammy rolled her eyes. Frida is so strict, she said to Fred, but you'll get used to it in a couple of years. So, you see, there's Frida. Yeah, so you guys, you see kind of where this is going, but stick with me. Stick with me. Fred did get used to it. He quite enjoyed being told what to do by Frida with her dazzling smile. The 4 friends spent all their spare time together, having violin battles, reading comic books, practicing plumbing, pretending to be French, and arguing over what they would call their quartet. They eventually settled on the Quarreling Quartet, which they all agreed was the perfect name. The quartet made their debut at the school Christmas concert, much to the confusion of the audience. So you see, and the audience is like, why are there only 2 of them? But then something interesting happened. The older they grew, the less time the 4 friends spent together. Sam and Sammy, it seemed, preferred graphic novels to music, and they left the quartet to concentrate on their comic book series. Carnegie Hall was eventually played, not as a quartet, however, but as a duo. Again, much to the confusion of the audience, because it's just the 2 imaginary people, which begs the question, why the hell are the people there to begin with? Are the instruments just floating? Like, I need some more info here. And this, dear friends, is the interesting thing that happened. Even though they didn't see their human friends much anymore, Fred and Frida did not begin to fade, nor did they get swept back into the sky like they had so many times before. Instead, they stuck around being an imaginary friend to each other. They became quite famous in the imaginary community, and a statue was commissioned to be erected in the sky above their imaginary house. And as this was the first case of its kind, imaginary scientists spent years trying to figure out how it had happened. Eventually, they concluded that friendship is friendship. Imaginary or not, the same laws apply. The statue should have disappeared every time a gust of wind came along, but it never did. And then we get the statue. So you see what I'm saying about how, like, they made this whole world, like this whole like idea, this whole lore around this imaginary friend thing. I thought that was kind of weird and a little creepy. Kind of like that whole, like, you know, Saint Nick's always watching you, that whole deal. Like, I always thought that was creepy, and this is sort of in the same vein to me. But guys, let me know. What did you think down below? What did you think of Imaginary Fred? And thank you for hanging out for another episode of Pax's Little Library of Horrors. Please like and subscribe. It would really help me out. And until next time, class dismissed.